Here's a guy who thinks that atheism doesn't make any sense.
Well, do you think there is a good argument, and by good I mean compelling, not just emotionally, but logically, argument for atheism?
No.
I don't think so either.
No. I mean, I used to be an atheist.
Okay.
So you might say, well, then why were you ever an atheist? Well, I mean, here's the thing. What I would say is the only way you're going to make sense of atheism is to stop making sense about the world, really.
If making sense about the world requires belief in a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind that created everything, then I guess I'm incapable of making sense of the world because I don't know how to make sense of God.
So, in other words, you have to push a very highly skeptical line about the scope of human knowledge, and you're going to have to push a line metaphysically that makes the world ultimately unintelligible. And one problem with that is I don't think it's because, and the reason I say this is because I would say that if you allow that the world is intelligible, if you acknowledge some version of what's traditionally called the principle of sufficient reason, which says that for whatever exists and whatever occurs, there's some intelligibility to it. There's some way to make sense of it, some way to explain it.
I don't allow that. I don't know how anyone could possibly know one way or another whether everything in the universe is intelligible. How could you possibly rule out phenomena with no intelligible explanation? How could you know that there are no such things? And even if everything is intelligible, why would that require God? Do you baselessly assume that without a God to make things intelligible, nothing could be intelligible on its own? Why would that be the case?
We may not always know what it is, but objectively, there is some reason why things are the way they are, not some other way. The minute you buy that basic premise,
I don't, and I don't see any reason to.
I would say you're ineluctably led to some kind of theism.
Why? Why is a God required to keep things from happening for no reason? This guy seems to think that there are definitely no events that happen for no reason, which I don't know how he can know for sure, and he believes that if there were no God, there would definitely be things that happen for no reason. I don't know how he could know that to be the case, and I don't see how that even logically follows.
And the only remaining question is the details.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what kind of philosophical theism are you committing yourself to? And is there any world religion that actually can be grounded in that philosophical theism? But you're embracing some kind of philosophical theism, which is why I think that the deepest atheists always end up pushing some kind of unintelligibility in the world, whether it's a Hume or a Nietzsche or someone like that.
I'm not pushing unintelligibility. I'm agnostic about whether everything is intelligible or not. I don't understand how any other position could be rational. How could you possibly know that absolutely every phenomenon in the universe is intelligible?
You can't really, in other words, be a rationalist, I would say, in the broad sense that means someone who takes the world ultimately to be rational through and through, to be an intelligible order, and maintain any kind of atheism.
Why? This guy seems to be making the very common theist assumption that the default state of nature is random chaos and that order and stability can only exist if it is deliberately imposed by a rational mind. There is absolutely no reason to assume this.
Okay, so that means that if you're going to hold on to atheism, you're going to have to make the world ultimately unintelligible, and thus the mind, something that's not capable of finding intelligibility in it or making sense of it. One problem with that, though, is I would say you can't ultimately make coherence or sense of that view.
If I were to say nothing in the universe makes any sense, then that claim itself would not make sense. I suspect some things in the universe do make sense, but I'm not convinced that everything does. There's nothing self-defeating about that statement.
Another problem with that, though, is that modern atheists tend to have a very highly confident view about human knowledge in other areas, particularly in science, and natural science especially. So they often pit science against theism.
I'm not as confident in science as Phaser thinks atheists tend to be. I'm only confident in science insofar as it seems to be useful. When falsifiable predictions based on theism have a better track record of success than falsifiable predictions based on science, I'll pick theism over science.
As the way that knowledge should be arrived at. This is the real McCoy. This is the real stuff.
I'm not sure that the conclusions of science are really knowledge. If you define knowledge as justified true belief, inductive inferences based on lots of evidence justify beliefs, but we can't be completely sure that many, if any of them, are true.
Modern science and traditional theism and traditional philosophy don't measure up to it, so we need to reject those and so on. Okay. So they're committed to a kind of intelligibility of the world in a way that a David Hume or a Friedrich Nietzsche were not.
Well, if you don't agree with Hume, how do you solve the problem of induction?
You know, Hume or Nietzsche, I mean, this is ironic that new atheists often look to them, I think especially Hume more than Nietzsche, but look to them as kind of forebears in the lack of faith, not in the faith, but forebears in atheism. But I think they would have looked at modern new atheist style scientism as charmingly naive, you know.
Are there new atheists who think the problem of induction has been solved? I don't recall hearing Hitchens or Dawkins ever saying any such thing.
As silly and naive about human knowledge, that they would say that the human mind is simply not capable of penetrating reality in the way even the new atheists suppose, let alone theists. So anyway, so you know, at one point in my life, I was willing to kind of go there and entertain that idea. And at some point, I realized it's unintelligible. You can't ultimately make sense of the view that the world is unintelligible. And
what about the atheist who says, I'm not claiming it's intelligible, I'm claiming there are certain things that when we believe them, certain actions that when we act in that way, things work out better for us. And so it's more of a pragmatic approach I have to reality.
That's closer to my view, but I would say more specifically that we have a longer track record of things working out better for us when we base our decisions on science rather than theism. We can't know that they always will.
It's not to do with can I know it, but when I use it in this way, I flourish, people around me flourish.
Yeah, but of course you're claiming to know that, right?
Nope, I believe it, but every claim I make is a belief claim, not a knowledge claim, and that includes this claim that I'm making right now. There is nothing contradictory about that, because while the statement, "this sentence is false," is contradictory, the statement, "this sentence may be true or may be false," is not contradictory.
So even to make claims about utility or pragmatic value presupposes a kind of epistemology and metaphysics, or to use the, you know, not to use the fancy jargon, it presupposes that there is some fact of the matter about how the world is, and that we can know that it's that way.
Nope, I believe that at every level there can be uncertainty. I'm even uncertain about the uncertainty itself.
And the question is, can you maintain even that thin sort of view about reality and our knowledge of it, consistent with a thoroughgoing atheism, with a thoroughgoing naturalist view of the world? And I would argue you can't.
Why not? Even if I were absolutely certain about something, I don't see why that requires a God to exist. I don't understand why order and intelligibility have to be consciously imposed onto reality. Why can't they just exist on their own?
And now, obviously, there are details that the interested viewer or reader would want to know about, and I've spelled all that out in detail in several places. But I would say that at the end of the day, you're going to have to, if you're going to make atheism work, you're going to end up with a very deflationary account of reality and of our knowledge of it.
Why is that bad? And even if it is bad, how would it follow that it is therefore not the case?
And it's going to be so deflationary that, first of all, it's not going to be compatible with the confident claims that someone wants to make about science, or even about the pragmatic value of science, the pragmatic value of whatever moral view they're committed to.
Again, I think this guy's overestimating my confidence.
But I would say beyond that, you really can't ultimately make this radical, deflationary, and skeptical view of reality and knowledge consistent, even with the most minimal sort of human thought.
Why not? Human thought just requires beliefs with some degree of stability. It doesn't require any belief to be absolutely certain. My strongest beliefs are ones that I hold because I don't understand what it would mean for them to be false. I believe in the law of non-contradiction, for example, because I don't understand what it would mean for it to not be true. The mere fact that I can't understand what it would mean for it to not be true doesn't mean that it is true, so there is some uncertainty even in my strongest beliefs, but I nonetheless have beliefs strong enough to make thought possible.
So for example, I would say that if you deny that reality is ultimately intelligible,
I neither affirm nor deny it.
That things exist and occur for reasons. There are things that cause them to be that way, and rather than some other way, say. Then to be consistent, you're ultimately going to have to say that that's true of your own thought processes.
Does Phaser not believe in free will? The idea of free will is a denial that our thought processes have causes that determine what they are.
And so we ordinarily think that the reasons that the things we believe on the basis of rational grounds. Mm-hmm. Even if it's just minimal stuff, like I'm sitting in a studio here at a table having a conversation with someone, something trivial like that, If someone says, if I just forget about someone else, if I say, why do I believe that? If I'm just talking to myself, as it were. Well, I believe that because of the sensory experiences I'm having, and I believe that I can draw rational inferences based on the kind of sensory experiences I've had in the past, and how it's likely, given those, that I'm actually having this conversation now.
You can make those inferences without denying that they can be mistaken.
And so on. Or even if I, entertain some crazy scenario, like maybe I'm in the Matrix, having the experience of being on Pints with Aquinas generated by the Matrix. Okay, well, even to entertain that hypothesis, I have to be able to see the connection between different ideas, between a premise and a conclusion, and so on, and draw the inference that, well, it might be at least possible that that's what's going on.
And even doing that doesn't require us to assume that there is definitely no unintelligible randomness in that whole process of inference.
So I'm presupposing that I have a functioning intellect.
You don't have to presuppose that. I can make those inferences while still being open to the possibility that my intellect is not functioning properly, and that those inferences don't logically follow. To deny that is to assume that every intellect is functioning, or at least that one's own intellect can never malfunction. How could I be sure that I don't unknowingly suffer from some delusional disorder? How can I be sure that my intellect is functioning? To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.